Hi, I'm Duncan Moss, and I'd like to welcome you to my latest video blog. Today will be another Beatles one. I'll be looking at the album with the Beatles, which was the Beatles' second album as far as the UK market is concerned. Uh, the Beatles had phenomenal success with their first album, Please Please Me, and that was in March 1963. In August 1963, they had released what would be one of their biggest selling single in the UK, She Loves You, and it went on to sell 1.6 million copies and was the number one single for 14 years until it was written mostly by Paul with a little bit of help from John, and its record would finally be broken by Paul's song Muller Kintyre, which he co-wrote with Denny Lane 14 years later. And the album had the most phenomenal amount of what you call advanced orders, and people were very, very excited. And it was released on the 22nd of November, 1963, which I think was a Saturday. And the same day, a certain time traveller, Time Lord, made his debut on on BBC TV on a Saturday evening, and he got a little bit eclipsed by an event. Both events did, by the fact that very sadly, 6 hours behind us, so we are in late afternoon or evening. I think about 1 o'clock. President Kennedy was assassinated, which was a terrible shock for the whole world. And many people think it might have been one of the reasons that helped the Beatles' popularity in the States. Although I'm sure it's the Beatles succeeded on their own merit. But people think that people desperately wanted, after the death of their president, American people definitely wanted something to get behind and to enjoy, and bring some joy back and fun back into their lives. And the Beatles might have played a large part in that. The album was released on the 20th of January in the States as Meet the Beatles. It wasn't their first Beatles album to be released in the States, but it was the first to be released on Capitol, which was the American division of EMI. There had been an album released beforehand. I can't remember the name of the record label, but I do know that the company, who had just a one album deal, did release it about 3 times under different names and to maximize profits. But I will be talking mainly about the British release, which starts off with a massive belter, Lennon and McCartney song called "It Won't Be Long." Very full of energy, and telling people that they were in for an exciting record. A very, very strong influence on the album was Smokey Robinson, who all four Beatles had a very great admiration for. And the second track, All I've Got to Do, a Lennon song, really does. It's written in the style of Smokey Robinson, and it's really a homage to him. There'll be a second homage a bit later on the album. We then launch into the Paul McCartney's song "All My Loving," which was probably the best song on the album, and it showed that Paul had come in a year from Love Me Do to something as good as All My Loving uh, was an incredible advancement. It's a remarkable song. It's got some fantastic guitar playing from George Harrison, really difficult guitar work. This was going to be something George was going to be given quite a lot of difficult guitar solos over the time of the Beatles, but he always gave a good account of himself. And the song was so popular that it wasn't released as a single, but it was released as an EP, and it got into the top 20 in time for Christmas. Strangely, with "Ask Me Why" and "P.S. I Love You," which were the B-sides of the first two Beatles singles, as two of the tracks on the EP. Surely it would have been better to have released a four-track EP, "All My Loving," with the other tracks all coming from the with the Beatles album, and then you could have put George's "Don't Bother Me," which is his first composition. That could have been part one of the tracks on the EP, and that follows straight after "All My Loving." Um, it's it's George didn't have think very much of it, but I think it's a very good song. It's very conscientiously written and performed. And it showed what a conscientious musician George was. I think it's quite up to the standard of Lennon and McCartney, but it's a good song in its own right. And George, of course, was going to do some fantastic stuff not that long in the future. We've then got Little Child, which is sort of bluesy, jazzy thing with Lennon on the mouth organ. Uh, Paul and John, I think, sharing vocals. It's it's quite loose, but everybody's clearly enjoying themselves. I think George Martin might have been playing the piano on that track. We then got "Till There Was You," which I think is from the musical The Music Man, with Paul doing a very, very fine rendering of the song. And we've then got, um, to finish off side one, "Please, Mr. Postman," which was, of course, was a cover version. They didn't write it, and it would be immortalised a few years later, well, 12 years down the line, by the Carpenters, who did, I think, the best version of it. And um, we then go over to side two, which has got "Roll Over Beethoven," the Chuck Berry song. I think it was Chuck Berry. Oh, and it's usually on stage. It was sung by John, but they gave it to George to boost his vocal contribution, and George does a very good version of it. His vocal, he's not the strongest vocalist in the world, but he has a nice backing voice. But he does a perfectly competent account in this, and of course his fantastic guitar playing really does excels the cover version. We've then got a very strange track called Hold Me Tight," a Lennon McCartney original, Paul's song. And apparently this was tried out when they were doing the "Please Please Me" album, and he's out of tune, bless him, on and finds some of the guitar riffs are quite they're set out, and he seems to be finding them quite torturous. Um, he is out of tune, and I just wonder whether they could have maybe. I'm not no disrespect to Paul at all, and I know that they were making their work albums very quickly. Maybe another track could have been substituted for that, and maybe they could have given the song to another performer who might have found the interpretation of the song a little easier. Um, We've then got You Really Got a Hold on Me, which is sung by John Lennon. It's a cover of Smokey Robinson's song. Lennon is very, very respectful to Smokey. Some people think he could have topped Smokey Robinson's version, um, but as I say, the Beatles were always showing respect to the artists that they thought highly of, and Lennon wanted to sing it that way. Uh, then that, who are we to question? We've then got I Want to Be Your Man, which is handed to Ringo. It's a John Lennon composition. And of course, it was a major hit, the first major hit for the Rolling Stones. Ringo does a fantastic version of it with his personality coming in. We've then got George returning with his version of The Devil in Your Heart, um, which he performs quite adequately. We've then got the last Lennon and McCartney song, which is sung by John, not a second time. Um, John, he performs it perfectly adequately, but you do get this feeling that he's, wanting to get out of the pub and rattling it off fairly quickly. He doesn't put a lot of his personality into it. It's almost like he is got his eyes focused on getting down to the pub after the recording. If you don't agree with me, please tell me. Maybe, I mean, uh, but it's a good song. And we've then got the last uh, song on the album, which is again sung by John. It's Money, Money. That's what I want. The song's just called Money, but yeah, the Beatles were earning money in massive amounts. Uh, Deservedly so. Every penny they ever earned was done fairly and squarely. And John thinks I think he was being John could be very satirical, so I think he's being satirical about money when he chose to cover that song. Now, the album was, as I said, was issued just under 2 months later in America as Meet the Beatles. It had the same front photograph. I've got the two of them here. We've got With the Beatles, that's the British release, and then we've got the American release, Meet the Beatles, and they've still got the same photograph, that fantastic photograph, which was taken by a photographer called Robert Freeman, who I think did a lot with the Beatles. No pun intended. Over their career, superb photograph and very iconic, as most of the covers of Beatle albums were. And the album starts off with "I Want to Hold Your Hand," which was their Christmas number 1 in the UK, and I think went to number 1 very early '64. And on the B side of it, I Saw Her Standing There, which was a very bizarre choice to put on the B side, because I Saw Her Standing There could have been another single in its own right. And when the Beatles, about a month or two later, covered the first top one chart places in the American chart, 1 to 5, I Saw Her Standing There could have made it 6. It then is covered by This Boy, which is the B-side of the British release of I Want to Hold Your Hand. The rest of the tracks are from with the Beatles. The first one, track 4 being It Won't Be Long, followed by All My Loving, and that's 5 tracks. And then we go on to side two of the album. So there's only 11 tracks on this album, whereas on British version there are 14. The Americans decided to have only 10 or 11 tracks on their releases, Capital. I'm not sure why that was. Somebody explained it on one of the another Beatle fan on their Beatle blog. I think it was to do with maximizing royalties or not paying too much for one album. From Capital, I'm not 100% sure, but they side two starts off with George Harrison's "Don't Bother Me," and I think it was Beatle Tone who said that he felt it sounded much better as the first track on side two. The song sounded better than that being where it's placed on with the Beatles. Uh, my apologies if I'm wrong. It's Beatle Tone. Uh, and then we've got um, Little Child, then follows with Till There Was You. Uh, comes next. Hold Me Tight comes after that. I Want to Be Your Man. Uh, and the album is finished off by Not a Second Time. Um, Maybe that sounds a little better, being the last track, than rather being the penultimate track on the British release. That is really it. Both albums did extraordinarily well, selling very well, and I think appeared in a lot of people's Christmas stockings in the UK. Um, as I say, it was just after Christmas for the American market, but a very fine piece of work, technically superior to the Please Please Me album, but I don't think it's got the charm that the Please Please Me album has. Please Please Me album is it's quite rugged, a little bit rugged, and but um, it's got such a load of charm and energy. Um, but they couldn't have just done a remake of Please Please Me. They had to move on into new territory, which they've done, and they've done it well. George Martin, who was said that he was learning with them, uh, does a superb job with production. And there's all this publicity about this new Beatles song coming out. So I thought I'd just stick my 2 cents in, or whatever the phrase is. The song is believed to be Now and Then, which was the track they were working on in the 90s for the Beatles anthology. But because of the screechy noise that accompanied John's vocal, George was very unhappy with it, and after supplying some rhythm guitar work, he suggested that they shelved the project and they, of course, the two that did were successful were Free as a Bird and Real Love. But now with new technology, the screech has been noise or background noise that was with John's vocal has been taken out, and drums and other instruments and backing vocals have been added. I heard I don't like this AI stuff at all. A lot of people, to a lot of people, it's a dirty word, and this idea of taking Paul's vocal and putting it down to when he was to when he was younger, I don't like at all. I'm happy for Paul to do uh, vocals, but the the voice that he has today, um, if I don't want to sound cheeky, they'll do it their way, and I'm absolutely adamant that Sir Paul and Sir Richard um, and Giles Martin will not let us down. That's really all I have to say about the matter. Um, I don't know how it's going to be released, but let's just wait and see. Um, But yeah, I'm expecting good things. I don't, you know, um, but no, it's just goes to show that over 60 years since their first releases, the lads are still um, finding new fans. They're still in the press quite regularly, and yeah, I don't want to sound melodramatic, but if it hadn't been for these boys, I might have killed myself. They helped me carry on in some dark times. Thanks, boys. And if you like this blog, please subscribe to my channel, and take the like button, or send it to a friend. But I'm signing off now. Enjoy the rest of the weekend. God bless. Bye.